Okay, so I think that's 5 past the hour, and I think we should probably make a start. For those who don't know me, I'm Craig Ritchie. I'm the chair of the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium, and a huge welcome this cold and wet evening here in Edinburgh, as Frank described earlier, to all of you for this, which is the third now of the sort of SDRC webinar series. First time doing it this round, and really delighted with the participation thus far in the series. And this is actually the first time we've done one which is topic specific. The first two were, I gave an overview about the SDRC and some of the directions of travel from research, and then last month we had Terry Quinn and Rich from Alzheimer's Society talking about what makes for a good fellowship application. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a couple of colleagues and friends from the University of Newcastle to talk about a topic which I think we all know to be very, very, very relevant, very topical, and sometimes even controversial, which is the links between nutrition, diet, brain health, and dementia. And we couldn't be joined by two, dare I say it, more expert individuals in the field. Oliver Shannon, who's a research associate in the Human Nutrition Research Centre at the University of Newcastle. And he's going to go first and talk a little bit about nutrition and diet and brain health from a sort of what we know about the topic already. And then we're going to pass to Professor Emma Stevenson, who's a professor of sport and exercise science, also at the University of Newcastle, and Deputy Dean of the Population Health Sciences Institute. And she's going to talk to us more about a very large project that we're collaborating on between the University of Edinburgh, Newcastle, University of East Anglia, called NuBrains, and also maybe just set a kind of a direction of travel for where this area could or should be going in the future. As always, if people can put questions into the chat, I'll keep an eye on those as we go through. And at the end of all these talks, we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A specifically for him. And then we can have a broader discussion after Emma's talk later in the evening. So, Ollie, can I pass to you?
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and thanks very much for the invite to talk tonight. So, just to kind of run through an outline of what we're going to discuss, I'm going to really cover these first 3 points here. So, hopefully, just kind of give a bit of a broad brush outline around what some of the current research is around different nutritional strategies for encouraging healthy brain aging. And the one that I'll probably spend most time on tonight is the Mediterranean diet, which is a dietary pattern that seems to have quite strong links with healthy cognitive aging, and is perhaps a bit better supported than some of the other strategies that I'll talk about. And then I'll hand you over to Emma, who, as Craig mentioned, will really chat about kind of what the future holds for nutrition and brain aging research, particularly with setting up the NuBrain Consortium. So just to kind of set the scene really, and I'm sure everyone on the call has kind of already heard figures like this before, but a statistic which is often thrown around is that about a third of Alzheimer's disease cases are attributable to modifiable risk factors, many of which are kind of lifestyle factors like what people eat, their diet, their physical activity levels, their smoking status, and other factors like social contact. And these are risk factors which we can target to try and reduce dementia risk. Now, a point which I think is quite relevant to make is that modifiable doesn't necessarily mean preventable. So not every case of diabetes or depression can be avoided, and not everyone, as we've seen in many of our own studies, will be amenable to dietary or other lifestyle changes. But I think the current literature provides some grounds for optimism in that it suggests that by influencing lifestyle factors, we might be able to help reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease and perhaps some other dementias as well. So just to kind of get straight into the main part of the talk tonight, I'm going to go through a range of nutritional strategies which have attracted attention for their potential role in improving brain aging and cognitive health as people age. And it's by no means an exhaustive list. I've really just picked out a few that I think sort of give a bit of background information. The first one I'm going to talk about is B vitamins, and I'm sure many of you have already heard that there are potential links between consumption of B vitamins and both cardiovascular and cognitive health. And this all seems to be mediated by their relationship with homocysteine. So B vitamins are involved in homocysteine metabolism. High levels of homocysteine have been associated with greater cognitive decline and also risk for cardiovascular diseases, whereas adequate or sufficient intake of vitamin B has been linked with low homocysteine concentrations and potentially attendant beneficial effects on cardiovascular and cognitive health. So B vitamins are found in a range of foods, many of which are actually found in the Mediterranean diet, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But just some examples of foods which are rich in the various B vitamins. We've got grains, pulses, nuts, certain fish, and also green leafy vegetables. Now, something that will be quite apparent in the talk I give tonight is that we obviously have kind of two different sort of strands of evidence to draw upon when we're looking at diet or nutrition and a health outcome like dementia risk. The first is the observational evidence, which is often used kind of as hypothesis generating research, or sometimes as kind of proof of concept. And then we have the more robust evidence, which comes from the randomized control trials. Now, in terms of B vitamins and cognitive health and also risk of Alzheimer's, there seems to be fairly consistent observational evidence to suggest that higher intakes of B vitamins, particularly folate, are linked with a reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. On the contrary, though, if you look at the data from clinical trials, most of the studies have actually found no link between B vitamin supplementation and cognitive function. And one trial which actually did find an effect of B vitamin supplementation and cognition was the FACET trial, which was published almost 15 years ago now. They recruited 818 participants who were middle-aged or older, so 50 to 70 years, and they gave them 800 micrograms a day of folic acid or a placebo for a reasonable intervention duration of 3 years. They measured cognition prior to and following the intervention, and they found that the change in cognition over that period was significantly better in certain domains with the folic acid supplementation compared with placebo. What was particularly interesting in this trial was that actually the results seemed to suggest that B vitamin supplementation, or folic acid supplementation in this case, was especially effective in individuals who had high baseline homocysteine levels and or low vitamin B12 concentrations. So this suggests that perhaps there might be certain subgroups of individuals who are more responsive to supplementation with B vitamins, and potentially this could explain some of the lack of effects which have been observed in other previous studies as well. Another study which has been conducted in this area, which explored the effects of B vitamins alone or in combination with omega-3 fatty acids, found no main effect overall of their 4-year intervention on cognition. So none of the intervention arms in their own right listed beneficial effects on cognition. But when they ran a subgroup analysis, they found that participants who had previous history of cardiovascular or cerebrovascular disease, so coronary artery disease or ischemic stroke, actually seem to be quite responsive to the combined intervention of B vitamins and omega-3 fatty acids. Now, I think we always have to treat subgroup analyses with a degree of caution, but again, it perhaps builds into this picture that the case for B vitamins might be that perhaps they're not applicable to all individuals, but it could be that B vitamin supplementation or at least achieving optimal levels of B vitamin intake, could be beneficial in certain subgroups. And the available evidence we have suggests that the individuals who perhaps might be a bit more receptive to B vitamin supplementation could be those with high homocysteine levels, low vitamin B levels, and established cardiovascular or cerebrovascular disease. I wanted to discuss vitamin D here, not necessarily because it has a kind of a strong grounding of evidence for its links with cognition, but more because it's probably in the past couple of years been one of the vitamins which has received most attention, both in the scientific literature and also in mainstream media. So vitamin D is found in a range of foods, so fish and certain full-fat dairy products and certain fatty products as well contain vitamin D. It's also photosynthesized in the skin from sunlight. And living in the quite grim conditions of England or Scotland at the moment, possibly at slightly greater risk of vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency. One of our professors in Newcastle is actually, you see I've included a picture here of happy eggs. He's been instrumental in the development of a vitamin D enriched egg as well, which is a really nice example of kind of naturally enriching a readily available food product to help increase vitamin D intake. That's Professor Tom Hill at Newcastle. But there are some links between vitamin D and various neurobiological pathways, which suggest that possibly vitamin D intake might be related to cognitive health over time. The observational evidence, much like we see for vitamin B, seems to suggest a protective effect of higher vitamin D intake or higher circulating concentrations of the key vitamin D biomarkers against cognitive decline or dementia. But unfortunately, at the moment, the kind of evidence from randomized control trials is really lacking for vitamin D. And when I was preparing for this talk, I was only able to find one longer duration randomized control trial, which was exploring the effects of vitamin D on cognitive aging or cognitive change over time. And that actually included a vitamin D and calcium combined supplement. They didn't find any effect on cognition. So vitamin D is something which I think is likely to receive attention in the years to come. But at present, we don't really know from a kind of a randomized control trial perspective whether or not intervening with vitamin D supplements can be used as a strategy to help lead to favourable changes in cognition over time. One that has also received a huge amount of attention is omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in certain fish or certain vegetable oils like flaxseed oil. The omega-3 fatty acids, but particularly docosahexaenoic acid or DHA, seem to play a key role in various processes in the brain, including the formation of neuronal membranes, and they serve as precursors to certain anti-inflammatory compounds, and they might also play a role in neuronal plasticity. We have, again, some fairly strong observational studies linking higher intake or circulating concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, but also to some degree eicosapentaenoic acid and alpha-linoleic acid, with reduced cognitive decline and reduced dementia risk. And these links seem to be particularly apparent in individuals who have the E4 allele of the ApoE gene, which is one of the key genetic risk factors for developing dementia. But once again, we see that the evidence from randomized control trials is a bit less convincing. And actually, most of the RCTs don't really seem to find an effect of omega-3 supplementation on cognitive health. I'm just going to discuss here, though, a secondary analysis of data which was carried out on the MAPT trial, which explored whether participants who were given a DHA and EPA supplement for 3 years or placebo for 3 years had different cognition as a response to the intervention. And this specific analysis that I'm referring to here They just looked at individuals who had low baseline levels of omega-3. So whether this group of individuals who started the intervention with quite low levels of omega-3 might perhaps be particularly responsive to omega-3 supplementation. And although they only found an effect on or a significant difference between the conditions on one of their cognitive tests, so this was the Cohort, their results suggest, perhaps tentatively, that it's possible that omega-3 supplements might have some benefits for cognition, at least in individuals who start off with quite low baseline levels of omega-3. So perhaps individuals who naturally don't eat much fish, or who don't consume oils like flaxseed oil, which are naturally enriched in omega-3. So the Mediterranean diet is a plant-based diet which has attracted really quite considerable attention as a potential nutritional strategy to facilitate healthy aging. And this diet is really based around the sort of traditional eating practices of individuals in the Mediterranean basin, so Greece and Spain and Italy, but kind of prior to the globalization of food systems, as over time the diet in these countries has actually gravitated more towards the classic Western way of eating. But this traditional dietary pattern which we're referring to is something which is rich in fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds, legumes. Olive oil is used as the principal cooking fat. The traditional Mediterranean diet also includes a moderate amount of fish and also alcohol, typically in the form of red wine at mealtimes, and a small amount of foods which we'd probably class as less healthy. So infrequent consumption of things like processed meats and red meat, and also kind of sugar sweetened products and beverages. And possibly because of a cumulative effect of different compounds in this diet, or some sort of additive or synergistic effect, it seems that there is stronger evidence linking a Mediterranean diet and a kind of a whole diet change with beneficial cognitive outcomes than there is for the previously discussed individual nutrients or even specific individual foods, which haven't really delved into tonight. Just to give you one example, and this is from an observational study. So once again, we need to be cautious in interpreting the findings in the sense that they don't necessarily provide evidence of cause and effect, and naturally might be subject to issues such as residual confounding. But these findings show quite nicely that individuals who have higher natural adherence to a Mediterranean diet seem to have a reduced risk both of developing mild cognitive impairment and then subsequently converting from MCI into having Alzheimer's disease. And you can see from the figure on the right that the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, on your y-axis you've got a Cox proportional hazard ratio, is almost about half what you see in individuals who have low adherence to the Mediterranean diet for those who have moderate or high adherence to the Mediterranean diet. Just a kind of a methodological point here, which might be of interest to some of you. When we're trying to map how adherent people are to the Mediterranean diet, the way we typically do this is by, firstly, we'll measure their diet using an established method of dietary assessment, like a food frequency questionnaire or 24-hour recall, and then we'll kind of code that data onto a Mediterranean diet scoring system. The ones we tend to use have 14 or 15 different points, with each of the points referring to a different food component. So if you consume above a certain amount, you might get a point for a specific food component, whereas if you consume below a certain amount, then you might not get a point. So the individuals here in the medium and high groups have more points on these Mediterranean diet adherence scales than the individuals in the low group. One complexity of this research, though, is that those higher points can actually be made up in many different ways, because if we have 15 different dietary elements which constitute this Mediterranean diet score, you could achieve a score of 7 or 8 in numerous different ways by consuming numerous different food products. And it can be quite difficult to kind of untangle what the food components which are driving this effect might actually be. And in some cases, actually, it seems more likely that it is a combination of effects from all these different foods that elicits an effect, rather than being able to say, for example, that it's the olive oil or the wine in this dietary pattern that drives the beneficial effects we're seeing. Now, once again, this is just observational evidence, but there is some nice evidence from randomized control trials, and this is just an example from the Navarra cohort of the large-scale Predimed trial, to show that actually intervening with a Mediterranean diet can lead to better cognitive function. Now, what we see here in the Predimed trial is they randomized participants into 3 different groups. 2 of them received a Mediterranean diet intervention, and in one of those groups they were kind of stressed to consume larger amounts of extra virgin olive oil. So they were given large amounts of olive oil free of charge by the researchers to increase their olive oil consumption. Another group had the Mediterranean diet, but they were stressed to consume additional nuts. And then a third group was just given a low-fat control diet. And in this study from the Navarra cohort of Predimed, they found better cognitive performance across the mini mental state exam and also a Spanish version of the clock drawing test with their Mediterranean diet interventions versus the low-fat control. More recently, actually, the Predimed team have published evidence from their Barcelona cohort of the same study. And unlike the Navarra cohort, where they just measured cognition at the end of the trial, in the Barcelona cohort, because it was planned into the study methods much earlier, they actually took measures of cognition at the start and at the end of the study, which allowed them to track cognitive trajectories over the intervention period. And in that study, they found that their Mediterranean diet intervention actually led to more favourable cognitive trajectories over time. So in the Navarra subgroup of Predimed, this intervention that I'm referring to here was actually for 6.5 years, whereas in the Barcelona cohort, because it started a bit later on, it was about a 4-year intervention, but still a reasonable intervention period, and they did observe favourable effects on the cognitive change over time. Now, most of the evidence to date has been carried out, or most of the evidence for the beneficial effect of a Mediterranean diet has been carried out in Mediterranean countries, but much less is known about whether or not we might be able to apply this Mediterranean diet as a strategy for improving cognitive health in a UK population. Now, we were quite interested and continue to be interested in whether or not the Mediterranean diet might be applicable as a strategy in the UK. So kind of one of the first things that we did in this area was our own observational study, where we analysed data from the EPIC Norfolk cohort, and we looked at the associations between Mediterranean diet adherence and cognitive function, and we adjusted our models for a range of potentially confounding factors as well, like education, ApoE status, socioeconomic status, and age and sex, and all of the other things that you'd hope to control for in one of these studies. And we found some significant associations between Mediterranean diet adherence and cognition. So individuals who had a higher Mediterranean diet adherence seemed to have better cognition. And just to kind of contextualize that findings in terms of an effect size, we found that on a 15-point scale, where 0 represents very poor adherence to the Mediterranean diet and 15 represents kind of perfect adherence to the Mediterranean diet, moving up that scale by 3 points was roughly the equivalent of about 5 few years of cognitive aging. So hopefully, the sort of size of an effect for cognition that's likely to be kind of practically meaningful, I guess. Now, that's just data from an observational study again, but we've been carrying out recently and continue to carry out a study called the Medex Uk Study. The PI for this study is Professor Anne-Marie Minihane, who's based down at the University of East Anglia, but data has been collected at UEA in Newcastle and also in Birmingham. And we initially carried out a 6-month intervention where we randomised participants either to a control condition, a Mediterranean diet condition, or a Mediterranean diet and physical activity condition. And in this study, the main things we were looking at really is actually whether it's feasible and acceptable to get people to eat the sort of foods and to increase their activity levels to the sort of thresholds that we think are likely to be beneficial for cognition. We did take a range of other outcome measures as well, but our main interest in this study is to see, as I say, the feasibility and acceptability of an intervention. And actually, as part of the NuBrain Consortium that Emma's going to talk about in a bit, we've actually carried out a further follow-on 6 months after the participants finished this initial intervention to see if the behaviour change that they established during the first 6 months of the intervention persists over time. And we're currently carrying out those assessments now. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any results from the Medex trial to share with you at the moment, but as you can imagine, given we were carrying out this study against the background of the COVID-19 pandemic, my gut feeling is probably that the increase in physical activity that we're looking to get might not have happened, or it might be perhaps a bit more modest than we were hoping to achieve when we originally planned this study prior to the pandemic. But our preliminary findings seem to suggest that we've been reasonably successful at actually increasing individuals' Mediterranean diet adherence in the UK setting, which I think is promising and suggests that perhaps the Mediterranean diet might be something we can look to apply in a UK setting in future years. Just to very quickly touch upon some of the possible mechanisms through which Mediterranean diet might influence cognitive health. Unfortunately, most of this evidence at the moment, again, is derived from observational studies, but RCTs are starting to emerge, showing links between Mediterranean diet interventions and some of the parameters mentioned here. But some of the suggestions are that a Mediterranean diet might improve cognitive health or reduce dementia risk by reducing amyloid burden in the brain, by decreasing inflammation and oxidative stress, indirectly by improving cardiovascular or metabolic health. And there's also some really interesting studies emerging to suggest that the Mediterranean diet might be effective at modulating the composition and the metabolism of the gut microbiota, particularly increasing the abundance of certain short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, which could then have potentially beneficial effects on whole body health and on cognitive health as well. Now, I won't dwell on the sort of future research too much, because I know Emma's going to go into this in a lot more detail, but kind of a few of the challenges that I think we have going forward include really sort of identifying what the barriers are for people currently not consuming the sort of foods and nutrients and dietary patterns that we think might lead to better cognition. We also need to look at ways in which we can develop interventions which are feasible and acceptable to the end user, and I think that's probably going to involve trying to engage with the food industry as well, which should be quite important really in this type of research. We need to kind of figure out who the at-risk groups are and who the individuals are that are likely to benefit from dietary or other lifestyle changes. And also we need to look at potential additive effects of diet alongside other lifestyle changes like physical activity, smoking cessation, or increased social support. And finally, quite clearly, we need to better understand some of the mechanisms through which various dietary strategies might lead to beneficial effects on cognition. So just to summarise my brief part of the talk, hopefully I've demonstrated to you that nutrition is perhaps one of the strategies that we might look to influence when we're trying to reduce dementia risk. And there's some evidence for individual foods or nutrients in facilitating healthy cognitive aging, but a lot of the evidence to support these ideas comes from observational studies, and the findings are to some degree inconsistent. We do have slightly more robust evidence for healthy dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet, but I guess a point for consideration is that actually eliciting a whole diet change in an individual could be more challenging to implement than perhaps asking them to incorporate a certain food or nutrient in the diet to a greater degree. So that's probably a challenge that we're going to have to look at addressing in the future. And hopefully, again, I've demonstrated, given some of the ambiguity in the literature, that there's considerable scope for more research in this area, some of which we hope to address as part of the NuBrain Consortium. So I'll finish there and hand you over to Emma. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks. Ollie, that was... Oh, I'm echoing for some reason. That was excellent. Oh, I'm echoing really badly. Am I echoing for everybody or just me?
I can hear you okay.
Okay, sorry. No, I was just saying that's brilliant. I wonder if there's any questions. I've certainly got a couple of questions, but there might be others from other people in the chat. Maybe while people are gathering their thoughts. One of the things is quite a sort of quite a technical question, I guess, and from the research that you've done with the Mediterranean diet, and that's the first time I've, by the way, sort of had illustrated how one scores the Mediterranean diet as a kind of an exposure in these studies. Can you score negatively? So, for instance, if you have certain components of your diet, or the olive oil, the nuts, the fish, can you take away scores from your diet if you eat, I'm going to say it, deep fried Mars bars? Is there or is it all positive? Because obviously diet is a combination of good things and the bad things, and can the bad things, in some ways, from your analyses, sort of, undo the good things, or is that not possible statistically?
No, it's a very good point, and you're kind of on the point there. So what you tend to do is most of these scoring systems have a threshold, and if you eat above a certain amount, you get a point. If you eat below a certain amount, you get a point. Sometimes, though, those points work the other way around, whereas, for example, in the case of red meat or kind of sugar-sweetened products or confectionery, there's a suggestion that with these points, if you eat, for example, with red meat, if you have more than 2 or 3 portions of red meat a week, you might not get a point, but if you have below that threshold, you might get a point. Okay, so it's not necessarily that the score's subtracted, it's just that it's kind of inverse scoring, where you get a point for lower intake rather than higher intake.
Okay. So I've just seen the other question I was going to ask, must have been other people thinking about it, because Sarah Gregory just posted it. It's, one imagines that your diet is something that operates across the life course. And one wonders, with these randomized controlled trials like the MAP study and Medex, etc., how much change can one anticipate from changing diet for a few weeks, if you like, across the whole life course? And I think the second point being made also, do you think there's a critical period of time in brain development or in brain health when dietary changes may or may not have a greater impact on dementia risk?
Yeah, two very good points, I guess. So for the first one, how long does the intervention need to be effective? I guess if you look at the meta-analyses, which have the added benefit of being able to run meta-regression, where you can look at the duration of the intervention and the effectiveness, you tend to see that longer duration interventions, as you would expect, tend to be a lot more effective, both at directly influencing cognitive health or cognitive performance in some of the tests, but also at influencing some of the things that might underpin that. So whether that's, for example, improving various aspects of cardiovascular health as well. So longer duration seems to be better. It's interesting, actually, because with a few dietary interventions, you do still see quite profound acute effects. Okay. And in some cases, for example, in the case of caffeine, if you give someone caffeine prior to a battery of cognitive tests, sometimes they'll perform a bit better. If they become habituated to caffeine over time, they might not still derive that same benefit from caffeine as they previously did. So whilst I think for the healthy dietary patterns, what we're probably seeing is the longer the better, sometimes you actually see that there's a diminished effectiveness of certain products when they're consumed over time. The second point around what the optimal window is, again, I can probably only speak in vague terms here and say probably the earlier the better. Yeah. But I think one thing that the evidence seems to suggest is that at least when people kind of prior to the onset of mild cognitive impairment or dementia, if you intervene, even in older individuals, there's still probably scope for some benefits on cognition. So I think the way in which we can maybe view that positively is saying it's never too late to make a change, perhaps accepting people who might already have dementia, and then perhaps it might be, you know, more about thinking about the hedonistic value of food in those individuals. But yeah, very vague answers, longer duration better, and earlier the better. I think that would be,
okay.
that would be my
There
thoughts.
is an awful lot of other stuff in the chat that maybe when we're listening to Emma, although you can maybe get on and type some replies if you like. But I'm aware we've only got 20 minutes left, Emma. We're enjoying that one so much. But can I pass to you now to talk about NuBrains and sort of future directions?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I'm just going to hopefully share my screen.
Yep, perfect.
Good. I can't see it yet, but you can.
we can see it, yeah.
Okay, so big thanks to Craig for the invitation to present tonight. So as Ollie said, I'm going to concentrate really on a project that we started not too long ago, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about what the plan is, and what we are going to do and what we have done already. So it's not started. There we go. Fantastic. So Ollie's done a great job of summarising the evidence so far, and you know, hopefully you can see that there is some promising stuff out there, but there's still quite a lot that we need to do to better understand. So more randomised controlled trials. Ollie mentioned about looking at these sort of combinations of lifestyle factors as well. So really, you know, further research is essential in this area, and it's really important that we better understand these relationships so that we can help to improve public advice and guidance. So I want to talk about the Brain Consortium, because this is something that we've set up really to try and to think about the research in this area in a slightly different way, and really try and push forward the area so that we can start to try and answer some of these questions. By no means all of them at all, but at least start to better understand some of these relationships. So firstly, just a little bit of background about where this all came from. So back in 2017, the MRC and NIHR commissioned a review of nutrition research across the UK, and this review was chaired by Professor Chris Day, who's actually the Vice Chancellor at Newcastle, where Ollie and I are from, and Professor Alan Jackson from the University of Southampton. So this review was really commissioned to have a look at the nutrition research across lots and lots of different areas, so the current state of the research across the UK, and then focusing on what we need to do differently or what we might need to do better, where the investment should be in the future to really make the UK sort of pioneering in nutrition research. And this is just one page from that review that I wanted to highlight, that this was some of the grand challenges that were identified within the review. And you can see there that the role of nutrition in brain development and aging was highlighted as a grand challenge and something that we really need to focus on moving forward. So this is just the text taken from that little box there, but these grand challenges around understanding how nutrition can support good cognitive function and mental well-being, and maintain this into later life. And although, you know, it was acknowledged that there are some really good programs out there, this was trying to make sure that the UK was at the heart of research in this area. So from the review, the UK Nutrition Research Partnership was developed, which some of you may have heard of, but this is a partnership between MRC, BBSRC and NIHR. And the aim of this NRP was to try and really attract new people to work with nutritionists in the UK. So forming multidisciplinary teams of people that may never have come together before, but to try and really think about thinking out of the box in terms of research questions. What other expertise have we got around us that could really help us to answer some of these questions in an effective way and accelerate progress in these research areas? So this is where NuBrain came from. So we applied for the first round of NRP funding and were lucky enough to be successful to receive a significant grant for 3 years to set up at this new consortium focusing around optimal nutrition in healthy brain aging. So there was only 2 consortia funded across the UK in this first round of funding. So we have a multidisciplinary academic collaboration of researchers, and I'm going to sort of introduce those researchers to you. But really what we're doing is answering those questions around how can we bring together different disciplines to answer this big question around nutrition and healthy brain aging. So my co-PI needs no introduction, but it's been a fantastic opportunity to work with Craig on this NuBrain's project. And actually, Craig and I've never met before this. And so, I think that the funding has succeeded already in that respect, that it's brought 2 different disciplines together. We've already done quite a lot together, even though it's sort of within the first year of the NuBrain Consortium. And that was one of the key things in the application, was that you had to have 2 PIs that had never worked together and were from different disciplines. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to work with Craig and his team on this. So we were allowed to have 6 co-investigators on our application, but again from different backgrounds. So these are our 6 co-Is that were involved in NuBrain. And we say Ollie's also our research associate on NuBrain. But you can see that a real range of disciplines here. And as a team, we work really well together to think about nutrition and healthy brain aging in a slightly different way. And that's what I want to sort of focus on in the next few slides. A really important part of this consortium is also, this is not just about academic work. So the research part of it is really important, but it's also around raising the profile, working with industry, working with charities, public health, members of the public, and really trying to get nutrition and healthy brain aging on the radar of lots of different people. So these are just a few of the partners that were involved right at the beginning when we were writing the application. But we're really, really open to working with different companies, different charities, different individuals. And already the list of our partners is growing, and we're having some really interesting conversations with retailers, with different charities. Brain Health Scotland is a good example that we're working with Craig with this as well. So anyone who's on the call who's interested, then we're very open and interested to hear about people's views and how they think we might be able to develop the consortium. So this is our vision, so to provide a step change in research in the area, so thinking about developing new novel approaches and techniques to really try and better understand this complex interaction between diet and brain health. And ultimately, really what we need to do is to be able to support appropriate behaviour change in the population. So we can do all the research in the world, but if we can't get people to change their behaviours or change their diet, whether, as Ollie said, that's by introducing certain nutrients or certain foods or a whole diet approach, we need to understand how we're going to do that and be effective in that process. So overall, what we want to do is to build a sustainable, internationally field-leading consortium and really think about how we can address these challenges in a different way. And I think that's one of the really nice things about this funding, was that we didn't have to be really set in stone about what we were going to do over the next 3 years. And it's all about how we can work together with people and think differently. So come up with new ideas, try things and see what might work to be able to then go for further funding in the future. So this is what we're doing, just so that everybody's kind of aware. And if there's people who are listening who are interested, we'd love to hear from you. But we're very much wanting to build a network. So there may be some aspects of the project that aren't maybe so interesting to some, but for others that might be something that they'd like to get involved with. So having this network that we can kind of grow and build. Providing a supportive and an open environment for ECRs is really important, and that is a big part of the NRP funding. Was about how we can bring ECRs from different disciplines to to work with nutrition and really try and strengthen the research that nutrition academics are doing by bringing those different disciplines together. What we want to do, and what we've already started to do, is to use existing cohort data sets. So we've got some really rich data sets out there, but there's lots of different ways that we maybe could look at those data sets, starting to think more around biomarkers, how we can capture different approaches to identifying these mechanisms that Ollie talked about. So this isn't necessarily going out and trying to collect lots of new data, but just thinking differently about the data that we already have access to and what we can do with that data. This part of what we've just been talking about in the Q&A there, but what we'd like to be able to start to think about is how can we develop and validate tools to identify those people that we really need to target. So who are those at-risk individuals? Are there certain population subgroups who would benefit more than others, for example? So how can we start to do these things from the data that we have so that we can really be quite targeted in our interventions? As I've already mentioned, so working with industry, retail, public health, government, charities, the public is all a really important part of the NuBrain plan. Certainly talking to retailers is really interesting. Obviously, that's where we buy our food, where we're very influenced about the types of foods that we purchase on a daily or weekly basis. So it is really important to be able to work with these types of partners to explore these different translational approaches to behaviour change. And this is something that I think we'll focus a huge amount on in the Brain Consortium, thinking about how do we support that behaviour change. And in the COVID world is how do we support that remotely as well? And that's really important to think about all the different groups in society and how they may need supporting to be able to try and change, or even think about wanting to change their behaviour around nutrition. Obviously, this is a very open consortium, so we're doing lots of things like talking tonight, disseminating findings and outcomes, and that'll be something that'll be ongoing throughout the whole of the NuBrain consortium over the first 3 years of funding. We're very keen to talk to people, share what we're finding, and try and collaborate as much as possible. And obviously, ultimately, we need to get more money at the end of it all to try and carry on a lot of this work. So hopefully throughout all of this, we're constantly going to be thinking about developing new funding proposals. New ideas are coming together all the time already within the group about where we might want to focus our efforts and where we want to look at opportunities for the future. So what have we done so far? Well, already there's considerable amount of work being done to sort of improve and further investigate the information that we have from cohorts and platforms. So in particular, EPAD and Prevent Dementia through Craig's work and Craig's team are working on this and looking at how we can maybe use some of the data that's been collected in these cohort studies to better understand these lifestyle intervention factors around healthy brain aging. Ollie's been doing some fantastic work and building collaborations with colleagues at the University of Exeter, for example, to look to see what we can use from the UK Biobank data to better understand these areas as well. And as Ollie has already mentioned, we've extended the AR UK funded Medex study, so looking to see at 12 months whether people are sustaining these behaviour changes, in this case around a Mediterranean diet and physical activity, and also looking at the efficacy of a web-based intervention to change eating behaviour and food choice. And as I said, this is something that remotely we're very interested in how remotely we can start to support people to change their behaviours. We started to publish some papers, which is always good. So this is a paper that is open access. So if anyone's interested, this basically just gives a lot more detail about the consortium, what our aims and objectives, what the different work packages are. A paper that Ollie's very recently published, which has partly come about with some of the NuBrain collaborations around Mediterranean diet and the hallmarks of aging, and some of that diagram of the mechanisms that Ollie's shown has come from this paper. So really nice to see that these things are developing already. As I've mentioned, public engagement is really important. We had a fantastic virtual research coffee morning in the summer. This was meant to be a face-to-face event through Voice, which is a global platform around public and patient engagement. But we did a virtual coffee morning instead, but it was fantastic. We had about 50 people join us and a really nice discussion, members of the public, around nutrition, around the barriers and the opportunities, I guess, in terms of how people can help start to change their behaviours. And it was really great to talk to people and understand what those sorts of barriers or opportunities are. So in terms of what the future holds then, it's really exciting. Every time Craig and I have our steering group meetings, we have great conversations, we come off excited about what we're going to be doing next within NuBrain. So we will continue to grow collaborations and develop the research, and obviously there's lots of other people who are working in this area across the UK, Europe and across the world, but we're really trying to look at this in a different way. And I think that's the difference with this consortium, is trying to be innovative about how we approach some of these research questions. Lots still to do to better understand, if someone said to us, what are the brain healthy foods? There's still a lot that we need to do to better understand what those different foods or dietary patterns are. But as Ollie's already shown, we've got some good emerging evidence to be able to start to have those answers. Identifying these at-risk groups is really important, and yes, as Craig's just been talking about, where do you intervene? So hopefully we'll start to be able to answer some of those questions. But certainly developing these realistic interventions, and that's what we always keep coming back to, is we can have this information, we can talk about Mediterranean diets or certain vitamins or whatever, but what we really need to think about is how can we get people to change? And as we've said, working with industry is really important to be able to do this. So yeah, thinking about developing behaviour change strategies, how we can support people in the public, and thinking about those different groups across society. So what might work for one group or one individual may not work for somebody else. So, these are really big questions, big challenges ahead of us, and certainly not things that we're going to fully answer through NuBrain, but hopefully we will start to be able to answer some of these questions and bring the right people together to be able to answer these questions, which is really important. So thank you, thanks for listening. I've put my contact details on this slide, and I'm sure Craig won't mind either that if people are interested in NuBrain, to contact either myself or Craig if you've got any ideas or thoughts or things that we might be interested in getting involved with, then we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Emma. That was fantastic sort of summary, not just of the NuBrain's project, but I guess its ambition, its scope, and outlining some of the future challenges. There was a little bit of chat going on that very last bullet point you actually brought up, and it's something we talked about at the executive for almost a full hour yesterday, and that is the sort of the equity of access to good nutrition or good nutritional advice. And I'm often struck by the picture of the Mediterranean diet, which, I'll be honest, looks slightly middle class, and what the challenges may be in the population at large. I mean, any thoughts about how we might seek to address that?
Yeah, I mean, we had a really interesting discussion about this yesterday, didn't we? So I think, and this is where this multidisciplinary approach is so important. So, we can do this research and we can get these findings, but actually we need to be, being within those communities that we want to target. So working certainly with colleagues in public health, working with charities who are face-to-face with people on a daily basis and understand those target communities. So a really good example is Newcastle United Foundation, who we work with. You're obviously very Newcastle focused, but this charity is it is the charitable arm of the football club, but it's very, very powerful within Newcastle as a city, so has fantastic opportunities to engage with different communities across the city, and the members of the public really engage back as well. So it's thinking about how can you have that engagement, and that's not always, or very often is not through academics. It's about working with partners to be able to engage with the appropriate people in the appropriate way and understand.
There's a comment, you could work with NCS government-funded youth programme who also work with the NUFC Foundation. And I think it highlights in some ways, and maybe I'm saying this to myself, this isn't just necessarily a medical or a healthcare problem, it's a societal problem. You have to bring in different actors from different disciplines, different areas, different industries to help support it. We've probably just got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to ask you a kind of sort of curly question. What do you think of the issues we have in front of us with nutrition and brain health? What do you think the biggest challenge is and will be over the next 5-10 years?
Oh,
I should have primed you for that, shouldn't I?
I know. Do you mean from a research perspective, or from? I mean, I think what we're talking about is the biggest challenge, and that's always the biggest challenge. So across nutrition, any lifestyle intervention is getting people to change. I think that is our biggest challenge. I think we can overcome research challenges. We have new techniques. We have better understanding. But if all that happens and we still can't get people to actually change their behaviours, then we're not doing what we want to be doing. So I do think that is our biggest challenge. And I think it's because people are bombarded with information about lots of different aspects of nutrition as well. So I think we have the challenge of what the media portrays about nutrition, and whether there's the right nutrition for diabetes or prevention or treatment of diabetes, which may be different to the right nutrition for cardiovascular disease or for obesity or for brain health. And so I think it's that really complex message around nutrition that is really challenging to approach and to be able to communicate properly with people, or effectively with people, and get brain health on the radar, I think, as well. Craig, you and I have had discussions about if you get somebody to change their diet and they lose weight, they see the benefit of that. Or if their cholesterol comes down, they see the benefit of that. But getting people to see the benefits of brain health is really challenging. And that's something that we need to think about more as well, in terms of how can we engage different people, different mechanisms, so that we can do that effectively.
So I actually felt awful I asked you that question just as I was asking it. I should have primed you to but I could not agree more personally. And if your other people on the call are thinking similar thoughts as well, about maybe the research is important, but the research is to give it the credibility of the messaging so that we can make the change. But at the end of the day, the biggest challenge is, as we all know with our diets, we're all the same. It's very hard to change your diet without very good reason to do it, and the positive feedback from a dietary change is also quite important. I hate to say we've probably gone over time. I'm so delighted that we record these webinars, because there was about 35-40 people on the call this evening. But I would hope that everyone will go away and share how brilliant this evening was, because I think as a summary of the evidence from Ollie and a direction of travel and future thoughts from Emma, I don't think we could have been better served, excuse the pun, with knowledge and information about this incredibly important issue. So on behalf again of the SDRC and for everybody on the call tonight, thank you so much, Ollie and Emma, for taking time out. I really appreciate it, and very much looking forward to working with you all in the future. Bye, everyone.